Okay, I'm going to turn and talk a little bit about hatred. And hatred's an interesting topic. I mentioned this with anger last month, that particularly in the Buddhist community, anger and hate are emotions, reactions that are in some circles denied. Um, I'm warm-hearted, loving. I practice metta for everyone. I don't hate anyone. I'm not angry with anyone ever. And while I get that as an ideal, it isn't actually a reality. If you're driving on a long drive and somebody swerves into your car, almost hitting you and almost causes a multi-car accident, probably you're going to react with some version of anger or hatred. First is going to be fear. Something bad almost happened. I almost got hurt or killed. And then when that didn't happen, then our response is, what an idiot, what a jerk. And so we move into anger. Anger is, I wouldn't mind smacking them around. I wouldn't mind if the police stopped them and arrested them. I wouldn't mind them having a little bit of harm. That would be okay. That's anger. Hatred is, if they were vaporized off the planet, I wouldn't mind. So hatred is, I want the other to be gone. I want them either to die or I want them vanished in some way or vanquished in some way. And what's important if we're going to pursue an authentic practice is we have to be willing to be with whatever comes up in our awareness. So if we're having hatred or anger, we have to be willing to recognize that and be willing to feel it fully. The only time that I talk about enlightenment or what enlightenment is, to me, it means the willingness, the ability to be with whatever is arising in our consciousness and awareness, whether it's blissful states, joyful states of no self, or whether it's, complete insane hatred. Whatever's here, we're with, and we allow it to be present. It doesn't have a meaning. Because we have anger or hatred arise, doesn't mean we're not a good person. It doesn't mean we're not well motivated. It means we're human. And we've had a human interaction that has stimulated that response. So leave room for these emotions, reactions to arise in you. Now, hatred normally has two presentations. The first is that blind destruction, the red hot hatred. I'm going to destroy this, this, whatever it is, this item. Yeah, I've seen people do this. They're assembling furniture, for example, get frustrated and end up throwing the furniture against the wall or something, just that exasperation. So that's kind of the red hot hatred, the blind hatred. The other is cool, icy, cold hatred. And this I often talk about as the assassin. This is that coolness that's going to result in destruction or death, but there isn't a lot of heat around it. It's very, very cool. In my family, we as children, we were punished if we got angry. My parents were allowed to be angry, but that my perception was the children were not. So I, for many years, didn't have the ability to contact my anger, but I was an expert at hatred. I really perfected the ice cold hatred. And I've told the story before. My parents were ones that would, physically punish us, which wasn't uncommon in those days. And I learned early on when I was 5 or 6 that if I simply looked them in the eye and gave no emotion, if I maintained a poker face, they would get unnerved and stop. And that was my strategy to minimize their physicality towards me. But I had to come to terms with that when I got older to realize that was a go-to strategy for me, a coping mechanism. And I had to work with that, and I had to learn how to open to anger, which I did. And I've told the story. I was having a session with one of my teachers, and we're working hatred. And of course, I thought of myself as a good Buddhist, and well, I don't have anger and all this. And So my teacher, in her wisdom, didn't believe me. And it turned out there was a fly in the room. And so she said, well, I want you to use, and I was also afraid of my own hatred. I thought, I could really come off the rails with this hatred. And she said, I want you to use your hatred and I want you to kill that fly, just with your intention, not actually physically doing anything. And she said, what do you think is going to be the outcome? And I said, well, that fly is going to be dead, maybe even disappeared. So she said, okay, well, turn your hatred on that fly. I want you to kill that fly. And she said, I'll take the karmic consequence since I'm directing you to do this. And so I was convinced I was going to kill this fly with my hatred. And I locked onto it and, gave it my all. And of course, the fly happily buzzed around the room and wasn't affected in the slightest, which was a great learning for me to realize I didn't have the ability to kill based on intention. And that was some part of me believed that's what would happen if I really let go into hatred. So we have to deal with whatever our patterns are and our stories are about these different emotions, particularly ones we consider negative. And we have to be willing to make contact, because until we work through the anger, we really can't open to authentic strength of the absolute. And the same is true of peace, that by practicing with hatred allows us to go more deeply into peace and stillness. And that's what brings us to the power. Ironically, peace and stillness in a kind of intense way, when we get into the real subtlety of it, has the ability to produce power. That's the force. Cessation is the force behind all of life, the life force we have. The oomph behind it is cessation, which is the core of the peacefulness and stillness, or the hub or the center. So this is why we have to learn to practice with these things, and we can learn to convert them. They can learn to be converted where hatred converts to authentic power. Anger is a substitute for authentic strength, and hatred is a substitute for authentic power. Typically, when we react with hatred, it's because we feel powerless. We're in a situation, somebody else has most of the power, we have very little. That's an opportunity for hatred to arise because of the power differential. And it's a way that we try to fill in, or we try to psychologically substitute for authentic power. One of the ways that we can work with this on our own, and I've had a few students do this, is we can work with things like a pillow. I've taken a lot of kitchen towels and just wrung them with my hands, really working through hatred, really feeling, having an object of hatred and really letting myself embody it, and feeling the resistance, feeling fear, feeling whatever else arises, and vocalizing the hatred, remembering somebody who you hate or you hated. And so again, twisting this towel, punching the pillow or mattress or couch, and really owning, I hate you. I hate you, really allows us to fully feel the hatred, because it's when we resist it, it's when we're tucking it away. It's, tucking it into that basement and locking the door. And then of course what happens is, under the right circumstances, the door bursts open and the hatred just explodes. And that's where we can damage relationships. People can be harmed emotionally, even physically. And that's why it's important to learn to work with and be with hatred, so you don't have a resistance and there isn't an avoidance to stuff it into the basement. We can allow it to be here when it is here.